Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Spider-Man Month here on World Class Bullshitters. Today's video is a little different. It's a commentary, but it's me, solo. So the other guys will be on the other ones, but we had a little mishap recording the first Spider-Man, so it's just me. But I'm going to do my best to give you the most insight of this film and my personal experiences with it. So get your timestamp set to 0 and press play right now. There we go. The classic Spider-Man theme. I would argue it's the last great superhero theme song. Many would say Wonder Woman, but the whole theme isn't great. This whole theme is. This was the first film to debut the Marvel Studios logo, which has stuck around until recently. I believe Doctor Strange was the first one to abandon it. There's the web. Now, for as much as I love this movie, I think the credit sequence is just okay. It's not amazing like the one from Part 2, and you'll hear me go on about that later. The producer, Laura Ziskin, she's dead. So rest in peace, Laura Ziskin. Alright, Spider-Man, the first time the name's ever seen on a big movie screen. Like I've said before, I could not wait for this movie. The anticipation was off the charts. For me personally, every single day was a countdown to this film. I would watch everything about it. HBO specials, E-Entertainment specials. Hell, I even taped over an old porno tape just to record the Spider-Man special on E, which later was released on DVD. I love this movie. Speaking of the theme, though, real quick, this is the only difference between the second and the first theme. They would do these little, like, asides, I guess, to the villain, which is cool. Most superhero movies, they had a theme and they just stuck with it. Like Superman's, the march is the same, but Spider-Man's changes depending on the film in the middle. But this is where it picks up back to the original part. The CGI is pretty dated, but it's stylized. It's a credit sequence. I can't really criticize it too much. Danny Elfman. I like Danny Elfman for the most part. He did Batman, The Simpsons, this. I'm not saying he's perfect. He's no John Williams, but he's better than Hans Zimmer. Costume designed by James Acheson. I know a lot of people would like to say James Acheson over-designed the suit, but I think the Spider-Man suit in this movie is amazing. No pun intended, and we'll get into more of that when we see it in the next hour or so. Stan Lee, everybody loves him. Avi Arad, nobody likes him though. There we go, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Now that's a cool credit. I believe Steve Ditko has actively forgone the compensation from this movie by choice because he's a objectivist, which is a very weird political view based on the writings of Ayn Rand. And personally, if I created a comic book and they made a movie, pay me all the way to the bank. I like this narration. It makes it feel like a comic book. I mean, I'm just looking for the little yellow box on the top left-hand corner. Before we get too deep in the movie, I'd just like to say this. I think a lot of people that have problems with this film, there's a disconnect between what they think Spider-Man should be and what this film was, and I think they don't judge it appropriately based on what's on the screen. I've read all the interpretations of Spider-Man, and this is a nice amalgamation of them all. And I'm not the biggest Ultimate Spider-Man fan, too. I prefer the original 616 universe, and I thought this was a nice translation of a mix of both universes. Peer pressure for the bus driver. Now this is Peter Parker right here, obviously, but he's a nerd, and he's the nerd of the nerds. Coming up, we're going to see a scene where even the nerdiest girl in school denies him. You're so lame, Parker. See, that's the shit that they forgot to put in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. He was essentially a model with good hair. And back to reality for Peter Parker. hate this teacher. Now, this is one of the few instances that really dates the film, the fashion of these teenagers, or should I say early 20 adults. No one dresses like this anymore, and that's fine. Oh, I've had that happen to me. It's awkward. But it wasn't with a girl I liked. This was my first introduction to James Franco. Thankfully, it wouldn't be my last. I can't wait for his movie, The Disaster Artist, to come out next year. That's going to be incredible. But back to this movie. I think Norman Osborn, played by Willem Dafoe, is great. He's up there as one of the great supervillain performances. And I think James Franco does a good job. And I think they look a lot alike. Enough to where I can believe it. Yeah, they don't have the cornrows, but they have the same shade of hair, same haircut. How Norman and Harry should be. See, now this creates a disconnect in Spider-Man 3, which is a bad film, but they make it seem like Peter and Harry had been friends for a long period of time in that film. But in this film, this feels like they've been friends for just a few weeks based on Norman's speech about public schools and private schools and all these other things. Another thing, this is my only criticism of this scene, they try to act like Peter and Norman have this father-son relationship. I don't really see it. At the end, I do love the iconic line, but I don't feel it's as strong as some people do. No, it's not. So in the original Amazing Fantasy 15 story, Peter goes to a science exhibit after school when people call him a nerd. I can't think of many open science exhibits today, so this is a nice modern interpretation. It makes a lot of sense. Because how else would you get him in a scenario with a genetically altered spider? It makes it less hokey. When I was in the 8th grade, I considered writing a paper on spiders for science class because of my love of this film. And then I realized I hate spiders and science, so I didn't. This actor has a really weird delivery, the black teacher. It's the first performance in this film that makes me go, what the fuck? Good old MJ. I know she gets a lot of flack, but I like Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane, and what I like the most about her, even over her performances, she really kind of stayed true to the spirit of this film, even though she's not attached anymore. She knows that these Spider-Man films are the good ones, the superior Spider-Man films, if you will. Indulge my shitty pun. And she sticks with it, and I respect that. And, as a Spider-Man fan, I do consider these the better ones. The Amazing ones feel like a product, these feel like a labor of love, and a very important landmark in film. Because if this didn't take off, you would not have the MCU the way you do. Most people say X-Men and Blade. Blade did come out, and Blade was a success, and X-Men was too, but this was an event. X-Men was not the event that this was. I don't care what the internet tries to tell you. I lived through it. X-Men had a little special on Fox, and it came out in a summer of not many big things, so whatever. Spider-Man beat Star Wars. Star Wars is the biggest thing of all time. Harry got busted, trying to slide in. We'll see that happens to Harry multiple times throughout this franchise. Don't make a move on Mary Jane. Again, this is a nice modern interpretation of Peter Parker because back then photography wasn't as cool and hip and trendy as it is now. This is kind of the only way you would have him be a photographer in the early 2000s. Plus, it sets up for this scene. Maybe I should go to the Kirsten Dunst School of Acting. I do appreciate that the spider looks a lot like Spider-Man's costume. Maybe that's where he gets the design from, even though we see him play around with a couple other ones. And so it begins, the journey to becoming Spider-Man. I've been bitten by spiders before. No superpowers, just a little bit of pain. So here's a new species detected. And the very CGI'd Oscorp. So under what conditions in battle would you wear a padded green suit? None, if you ask me. But I will give this film, and somebody I dislike, Chris Stuckman, credit. This does not look like a Power Ranger costume in the slightest bit. I feel it's like an internet phrase that got thrown around, and when people researched this film, they picked up on articles that said that. No one thought it looked like a Power Ranger suit back then. It looked like a techno styling of the Green Goblin, which, it's okay. I think of the Raimi trilogy, the Green Goblin has the weakest design elements. I think Doc Ock has the best. I even think Sandman and Venom look good. But we'll talk about those later. Dr. Strom right here really annoys me. I love when he dies in a few minutes. Sorry to spoil a film you've already seen. But this film does a good job making you sympathize with Norman Osborn right here. See, it gives the villain motivation. A lot of superhero films today don't. You get, I want to take over the world, or I'm not crazy, but I pretend to be to fuck with the social order. I like this one, because it's a man that has lost everything, and he's just gone absolutely insane. And I like how it affects Peter's life personally, and Harry's life, and it just goes to carry on. Essentially, the Spider-Man trilogy is the sins of the father. And I like that. I really wish they could have continued on to more films. I don't think there'll ever be a better Aunt May than Rosemary Harris. I mean, Marissa Tomei is good looking, but Aunt May's not supposed to be a hot MILF. Aunt May is, an older lady. Uncle Ben, played by Cliff Roberts. I think the best interpretation of Uncle Ben. People need to take into account Uncle Ben is not really there in person in the Spider-Man mythos. He's there in spirit. He lives on through Peter's memories and flashbacks. He's really not a fleshed out character ever. Amazing Fantasy 15 Spider-Man story is roughly 12 pages, maybe? And he's only there in half of them, and maybe he's only in one or two panels. He's just a smiling face, and he happens to die. But this film gives him, purpose, motivation. And I think he does a good job. He becomes a lovable old man, and you do feel something when he dies. They got everything right in this film. Even Aunt May's house looks like it does in the comic books. Uncle Ben's got a cool vest. So it's funny that they have to CGI him to be skinny, but the real actor's really buff. Only in Captain America do they do that. And here comes some of the Sam Raimi elements. We get a little Evil Dead body horror type of action going on with these kind of cuts right here. I'll admit it, later on in the film there's a scene that used to make me jump. Not from being like legitimately scared, just it caught me off guard. A jump scare, if you will. Alright. It's fully formed to his DNA. He is now Spider-Man. Now this Oscorp shot looks awesome. This can't go wrong. If it doesn't go wrong, there's no story to this film. If I'm being honest, I could sympathize with Dr. Strom and his hesitance to do these things, but I have to respect Norman Osborn at the same time because of his drive, and he wants to save his business and his company. I mean, he's built an empire, and he's, willing to lay it down on the line to keep it going, even though his board of directors do not feel the same way. Little dramatic glass break right there. I don't think that was acting. So in the comic book, Norman Osborn's working in his lab, and there I believe there's a fire and an explosion, and it hits him with the chemicals, and that's how he becomes the Green Goblin. And in the comic book, it's just a suit. Side note for the listeners, the Green Goblin did not debut with the glider. He had a flying broomstick that he used to ride, and thankfully they changed it because the broomstick looked really hokey. The Green Goblin's kind of hokey too, but he's one of Spider-Man's greatest villains. I'd say his second greatest, with Doc Ock being number one. I had a Lego set of this scene. Only Lego set I think I've ever purchased. Again, I believe this is why Sam Raimi was hired, or at least this is a Sam Raimi touch. I personally believe Sam Raimi was hired because he loves Spider-Man, but this is a very Evil Dead moment right there with the white eyes. We're going to get a lot more Sam Raimi idiosyncrasies when we get to Spider-Man too, because he's a proven director at that point. But they're in this film, and I think they're beautiful. There it is. That's an odd cut. I feel like he says back to formula way too calm. So it's the morning after. Now in the comic, they don't make it seem like Peter goes home sick and sleeps. He kind of has a little bit of a spell of lightheadedness. He kind of almost gets hit. He almost gets hit by a car. He jumps up. He grabs a pipe. He crushes it like paper, and then he kind of experiments with his powers. It's all condensed down into essentially a page. By the way, the original artwork for Amazing Fantasy 15 is in the National Library of Congress. I believe it's the only piece of comic book art in the Library of Congress, and it was donated by a private collector that no one knows. I think it'd be kind of cool if it was Steve Ditko. Part of me would like to believe that even though he has these strange political views, he does take pride in his creation of Spider-Man. And make no qualms about it, he did create most of Spider-Man, the stuff we love. Stan Lee came up with the concept of a man climbing on a wall and maybe web shooters, but it was Steve Ditko that made them wrist web shooters. He designed the suit himself. The characters, the interactions. There was a point where he essentially just wrote, or Stan Lee, I don't even think Stan Lee would write the script. What would happen is Steve Ditko would draw out a script and Stan Lee would add the word balloons. So I think you need to really give Steve Ditko all the credit you can when you discuss the creation of Spider-Man. I like that line a lot. There's Sam Raimi's car. First Campbell hates it. Now, Mary Jane's abusive father is an element created in the 1980s. Prior to, I guess, the 70s, the character had no development whatsoever. She smiled in almost every panel. She was just a party girl. She was fun, she was light, she was an airhead, essentially. In the 70s, she finally showed a little bit of concern when Gwen Stacy was killed by the Green Goblin. And in the 80s, early 80s, I think Ron Friends drew the issue, you learn about Mary Jane's history. Even later on in the 80s, a story drawn by Alex Savick, who, by the way, is a really nice guy and a fantastic artist, I know him personally, discusses Spider-Man and Mary Jane's lives in a parallel, which is very similar to this film, with the exception that Mary Jane knew that Peter was Spider-Man from an early age. Contrary to what you believe, she doesn't really learn it until part 2. As a kid, I always wondered how Spider-Man's fingers stuck to the wall. Norman Osborn's penthouse. So I guess Harry's not going to school that day? Maybe he's just going late. That chair in the background was featured with the action figure, which it's an odd choice, but whatever. That always would catch me off guard. Bernard. They're in the back room, behind the mirror. There's our first appearance of the Daily Bugle. So now I went to a private high school, and we never had this kind of variety for lunch. It was burgers, chicken sandwiches, and french fries. And they were like barely decent. That scene was featured in a lot of trailers and promotional material. Back to Kirsten Dunst. She looks really good in this movie. The hair color is right. She looks nice and healthy. But when we get to the sequels, her skin looks off. Her hair color is wrong. It just... I don't know. They didn't commit to the character. That's the only real criticism I have of the sequel. She just doesn't look good. I always wondered if this hurt. A lot of people say his webs are a metaphor for puberty. As a kid, I never read into that like that. I just thought it's a superpower and it's cool. And while we're at this scene, I personally don't give a shit if he has organic or mechanical web shooters. That's not what defines the character of Spider-Man. What defines the character of Spider-Man is the sense of responsibility and the power and the responsibility aspect, and the fact that he's willing to sacrifice everything to do what he feels is right. I do like, though, that this is the only film that doesn't have external web shooters. I can't stand that. If they got to be under his suit, fine, but don't ruin the nice contour of Spider-Man's costume by putting bulky web shooters. That's the one critique I have of the Homecoming suit. People are going gaga over the eyes. I hate the web shooters. That is Mr. Sofia Vergara, so good for him. He's also Deathstroke the Terminator in the DC universe, so that's cool, if it ever pans out. I do like the visual interpretation of the spider sense. In the comic book, it's just black lines that emanate from his head, but here we finally get to see it. Harry did make it to school that day, just in time for lunch. And every interpretation of Spider-Man has a really cool sound effect for the spider sense. I think I like this one the best, followed closely by the animated series from the 90s. This scene perfectly portrays the spider sense because we see it from Peter's perspective, and then we see how it translates to the real world. And it gives us it creates the visual shorthand. We now know how Peter sees it and how the audience and everyone around him sees it, and that creates another level to this film. Because early on they established this, so when you hear that sound effect, you know what's coming. You aren't thrown off by random moments of slow motion or sped up action. You're now with Spider-Man. The moment of realization. I always thought this was really cool, but it makes me wonder if it hurts when he touches other people. Does he have to be careful? Can he ever finger Mary Jane? I don't know. When I was a kid, I used to walk up to brick walls and look at it, and people thought I was trying to climb up it. In reality, I was just trying to learn perspective for drawing. But either way, I looked like an idiot. Alright, the first moment of fun in this movie. Even though the CGI is 15 years old, this stuff still looks pretty good. This scene right here may be my favorite moment in the movie. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to jump the gun and preemptively say that. But it's definitely the funniest moment, I think, of any superhero movie. Even over Shazam. I didn't want to talk over it. I think a close contender is the Hulk in the Avengers, but this just takes the cake. The moment is perfect. The music stops. And then we go on to the aiming of the webbing. The eagle-eyed viewer will notice that this webbing is inspired by the Todd McFarlane style spaghetti webbing. Before that, it was just a straight line, and it looked like a net when it sprayed out. But this, as you can see right there, has the detail and the grooves. It looks like hot glue, but it's cool looking. Again, a very Sam Raimi moment. Back to Queens. Oh, Peter forgot. See, what makes Spider-Man different and what makes this version accurate is that Peter was off doing other things, but they weren't nefarious things. It's not why he missed his obligations. Other characters may be off doing things that are more important to them and not other people, but he was out discovering himself, and he just got lost in time. And that's kind of the tragedy of Spider-Man. He gets caught up with Spider-Manning, and he misses out on the Peter Parker moments. So he just missed out on what could have been the last close bonding moment with Uncle Ben. Now, speaking of bonding moments, this is one of the nicer, tender moments in the film. You kind of learn about Mary Jane, and she's not so much of an airhead, even though her stomach is sticking out. I know people give Tobey Maguire shit because he cries at the end of Spider-Man 3 and stuff like that. But in this one, he brings it. He was the best choice in the early 2000s, and he's very true to the character. I know a lot of people want Spider-Man to have a sharper wit, and that's fine. That is part of the character, but it also is contingent upon the scenario. This film doesn't really have many lighthearted scenarios for him to quip. This is more of an emotional drama, and this is where Tobey Maguire shines. He's able to show the earnestness of Peter Parker while being able to portray his love for Mary Jane in a very subtle way already. And he can say stupid things like that. I did like that moment where he leaned in, only to get rejected slowly. I'd like to think if they did make a Spider-Man 4 that Mary Jane's fortunes would have turned around and she would have been on Secret Hospital, the soap opera. Because, I mean, if you made that nowadays, you couldn't because soap operas don't exist. But in the late 2000s, they still were around enough to where people would understand what a soap opera is. Now I guess you'd have to be on a reality show or a host of something. But Mary Jane should have been on television come part 4 because it is where the character goes. She's a model. She gets into acting. And this was the only way I think they could have done a long-standing Spider-Man franchise. They theoretically could have been doing it like they do James Bond, where every couple of years he comes back, does a new story. I said it in previous episodes of the podcast. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man could have conceivably showed up in the Avengers had they not rebooted it. In the Battle for New York, he could have saved Hawkeye or one of the lesser Avengers, Black Widow, one of them without super powers, and it would have just been nice. He comes for the fight, he leaves, we know he's in the world, Spider-Man 5 would be out, but that is a pipe dream that'll never happen. God, the cars that are going for that money then, I bet go for barely anything nowadays. Runs okay, looks good, needs repairs. This movie also came out in a really good time frame where wrestling was still very, very popular. Nowadays, wrestling's a joke, much like that Thunderbird car. I believe this is Phil Jimenez, who's a very famous comic book artist doing the artwork that you see here. Phil's known for his work on Wonder Woman. He did have a run on Spider-Man. He's a pretty big heavy hitter. He's a great artist. I'd suggest you Google him. I think he's one of the most prolific gay artists, too. Not that that matters, but he prides himself on that. This has always been an aspect of Peter Parker's character. He's an artist. I'm not saying he's a Steve Rogers level artist where he carries a portfolio that contains a secret shield, but it makes sense for Peter to be able to draw these things. Put it like that. It is part of the mythos of Spider-Man. And it's something that I connect with this film, too, because around this time I was drawing Spider-Man a couple times a day. Dr. Pepper product placement. There was a Peter Parker action figure that came out around this time in this costume, and he could shoot a web, and I believe he could fill his back up with water, and then his backpack caused the webbing / water to shoot out. There's the broken lamp, so there's a bad continuity gaffe. I would love to own this. Just this prop of the Daily Bugle. The Inner Demon. See, unlike the Uncle Ben of the Amazing Spider-Man franchise played by Martin Sheen, this Uncle Ben seems concerned and well-meaning, and firm, but not cliched. It's like the uncle you'd love to have. Now I have to admit, this scene bothers me. Not to the level of making me cry, but it always makes me think, how shitty would it be to have your last moment with someone you love, essentially your father, be a terrible moment. I couldn't imagine, the last thing I ever said to a family member, you're not so-and-so, don't pretend to be, and hurt them, and then never be able to rectify that. But that is the beauty of Spider-Man. It is meant to be emotionally downtrodden. He's supposed to lose, and only as Spider-Man is he supposed to win. Peter Parker is meant to lose. This is the day that happens. That line is originally uttered by Stan Lee, the narrator, at the end of Amazing Fantasy 15, but over time it's been given to Uncle Ben, which is fine, it works. Everything doesn't need to be a direct adaptation. Oh, there it is. Yep, look at the pain in his eyes. See, that's what these other Spider-Man films lack. Good acting. They're worried about jokes, they're worried about being dark, they don't get the human drama that is the Spider-Man universe. Even in the beginning of Spider-Man's run, it was that. It was never this, let's make jokes and I'm going to act like a proto-Deadpool. No, it was a humanistic drama, and most of the story would be about Peter Parker's love life, or Aunt May being sick, or dealing with school elements. This film does it. Now, one criticism you could make is that, this isn't even a real criticism that I have, but you could make it, and there's Macho Man. Side note, when I was a kid, and wrestling was still popular the way it was back then, I thought this should have been The Rock. But growing up and becoming an adult, I realized how perfect it is that it's Macho Man Randy Savage. Arguably one of the greatest of all time. Not even arguably, he is one of the greatest of all time. But this is not the wrestling podcast. Back to Spider-Man, though. In Amazing Fantasy 15, all of these moments occur after the suit's created. So Spider-Man does not have a proto-wrestling suit. He creates his regular suit, and then wrestles, and all this stuff happens with Uncle Ben. I'm just going into the super nerdy aspect, if you will. Now, as a kid, I knew who Bruce Campbell was, but I didn't realize this was Bruce Campbell. Another side note, when this film came out, The Flying Dutchman was part of SpongeBob, and SpongeBob was super popular. I think it's Octavia Spencer. She went on to win an Oscar, or at least was Oscar nominated. Back then, she would just randomly pop up and shit, and she was not considered a heavyweight actress. Just a heavy actress. God, he looks like the Ultimate Warrior. I think most wrestlers back then would have loved to have done that to the Ultimate Warrior. God damn, I love that man. I wish he didn't die. Rest in peace, Macho Man. In the comic book, Spider-Man wrestled a man named Crusher Hogan, who was a big, bald, burly guy. Side note, in the 1980s, I think it was Spider-Man 271 or 273, Crusher Hogan came back, and that is my favorite Spider-Man story. I suggest you check it out. It's quite touching. It's a really small one-off story. It doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things, but it's a nice character moment that most superhero things don't touch on today. I had this action figure. These chicks are scary. They got wrestling right for the most part, except this. I don't know many women that would just rip on a guy as they walk to the ring. Now, either they're treating wrestling like it's real or they're really hamming it up. Either way, like I said, I think they paid enough respect to it. Also, this is not how a cage match works in the WWE or any professional wrestling organization. It doesn't just descend like that. It kind of hovers above the ring and then it's slowly lowered. Hey, but this is not the WWE. I don't know if I'm right, but I think Bruce Cable's wearing a Cadillac logo in gold around his neck. I just have to let it be known it's not proper to speak over Macho Man Randy Savage. There's your joke. There's your first Spider-Man joke, and that's one of the best ones in any of the films. Again, it's appropriate. It's poignant to the scene. Oh, man. What a wicked chair shot. It's like the end of WrestleMania 17. Except Spider-Man's going to win this fight, unlike The Rock. See, they don't even use the wrestling aspect of the Spider-Man character. But in all the interpretations in the comics, he does wrestle first. Even in the Ultimate Spider-Man timeline, he wrestles, which is the year 2000. So in the modern interpretation, he still wrestles. I wish they'd bring that element back. I'm not really a fan of him being on YouTube and all this shit. This is a very important scene for the character development. This is where Spider-Man has learned great power, and he's about to learn great responsibility. Also, the promoter's the first man to call him Webhead. Words you'd learn to live by. That's the true killer of Uncle Ben, not the Sandman. Exactly as it happens in the comic. Poetic justice. A little smug there, Peter Parker. You learn to regret it, though. Now, in the comic book, Uncle Ben is killed at home, not outside waiting for Peter. Small change, doesn't really affect the story whatsoever. An appropriate response. For everyone that complains that he cries in the movie, let your parent get shot in front of you, and we'll see how you take it. Now that anger starts to show in just a moment. No cocky raised eyebrow or anything like that, just a moment of intensity. Now here's where the seams start to show in this film. This CGI is incredibly dated. Even I, a man who loves to defend this movie till the end, will say that this does not look too good. It's still cool, though. You could not have made this film 10 years prior. Side note, in the original trailers and a lot of the pre-release footage, that this scene took place with the regular Spider-Man suits. So there was a time when they intended for Spider-Man to wear his traditional costume during the wrestling scene. I like that they don't have it. I think this is a nice go-between, because he's in a rush to make this money for Mary Jane. He just takes stuff he has at home. And then over the summer, he makes a new suit. I don't know off the top of my head if Spider-Man swings on webs like this in the first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15. I'm going to go ahead and say no. I think it just there's one panel of him attempting to, but we don't see this kind of web slinging until maybe a few issues in. A lot of running and jumping on rooftops. I don't think Steve Ditko understood how to portray that yet. And I'd argue he never portrayed it properly. Until he got John Romita Sr., the second artist on Amazing Spider-Man, did I think Spider-Man's web swinging look good. I dare say almost perfected. But my opinions on John Romita Sr. will be known at a later date. This is a nice blend of CGI with live action footage. I think that looked really good. Still holds up well to this day. The way you trick your audience is you intercut between CGI and real as quick as possible, so they don't have the time to realize it's not real. And that scene did it perfectly. In the book, I believe the excuse they have for not finding him right away is that they're waiting for the moon to appear from the clouds or something like that. Or it's on the other side. That's a very cool element that'll be reused in Spider-Man 2. And there's the realization. In this film, he's known as Carjacker or Thug. In the Spider-Man 3, he's known as Dennis Carradine. The crook gets to die without making Spider-Man the culprit. I think that's important. That we're able to sympathize with the character of Spider-Man this entire film. If he would have killed him personally, I wouldn't have cared, but the hero's journey would have been marred slightly. A nice blend of digital mats and live action stuff. Imagine coming home and trying to tell someone this news. have a hard enough time telling someone the bad news that like my grandma's in the hospital or something like that, but I don't know if I can handle it. And thus ends the first act of this film. The structure of this film is very similar to Superman, the movie starring Christopher Reeve, because at that point, that was still the archetype for all superhero origin films. Batman in '89 really is not an origin per se, because within the first 5 minutes, you see Batman. And that's fine. That's a topic for another discussion. Excuse me, that's a discussion for another day. I always find it funny in these films, they give you these stupidly designed exoskeleton suits. Like, what war would that be effective in? Talk about a bunker buster. Kind of a dickish thing to say. See, if they wanted to add a little more, another layer of jealousy where I think I would have picked up on it a little heavier would have been if he kind of brushed past Harry instead of giving him a congratulatory handshake or hug or whatever he just gave him. That could have shown a little bit of dissension between Peter, Harry, and Norman. But Harry's worried about sliding into Mary Jane. So every problem Harry has in this film is based on his interest in banging Mary Jane. In Spider-Man 2, he always wears blue jeans with that same jacket. Where'd the pants go? On a serious note, though, it's nice to see the aftermath. A lot of films would just show the tragic event and then something happy and keep it going. But this shows that the characters are still affected by the death of Uncle Ben. And so far that even in Spider-Man 3, they keep bringing it up, which they should. That's the crux of Spider-Man's guilt. That's where everything stems from. And that's where the character and the hero of Spider-Man really comes alive. Prior to Uncle Ben's death, he was just Peter Parker in a costume. After Uncle Ben's death, he was a superhero. Again, this is solid acting. This is something you don't see in any of the other Spider-Man films outside of the Raimi trilogy. And I don't think we're going to see it in Spider-Man Homecoming. I'm not preemptively saying the film's going to suck. All I'm saying is, at this date, which is June of 2017, I haven't seen anything top this in Spider-Man 2. And here's the moment where he realizes he must become a hero. I do like the parallel to this scene in Spider-Man 3. I think it's my favorite moment in the entire film. It always pisses me off how everyone's criticism of this film is, where did he get the suit? It's too good. Really, if you're complaining that he has a suit that looks that way, why don't you complain that he can climb on walls? Because that's wholly unrealistic. It's a fantasy film. Just go with it. Those are elements that you're not supposed to concern yourself with. Where does Superman get his suit? Why doesn't it catch fire? And all that other dumb shit. Well, we know why. There's an aura around his body. Anyway, I do love how they are hesitant to show the first appearance of Spider-Man. See, this is another element of Superman the movie where the hero appears and then there's a montage of superheroing, if you will. Jim Norton, I love that dude. This is a moment ripped right from the book. The fucking notes. Spider-Man used to write notes all the time. There's Xena Warrior Princess, by the way. Is this the Naked Cowboy? This guy was kind of popular for a while in the early 2000s. This moment was from the trailer. Very well done. But here's the real star of the film. J. Jonah Jameson. The man, the myth, the legend. They were able to fully realize the Daily Bugle within 20 seconds. As of now, we know how everything works, and it's just an elaboration of it. Robbie's the voice of reason, J. Jonah Jameson's the hothead, Hoffman's trying to do his job, and Betty Brant's responsibility is just to cue in J. Jonah Jameson on the things he's ignoring. That oddly tall, thin woman does appear in Spider-Man Part 2. That is Ted Raimi, Sam Raimi's brother, who is a fine actor in his own right. Eddie Brock, there's a name drop right there. I wish they would have continued that instead of making Edward Brock Jr. What he was. Eric Foreman with shitty frosted tips. Did his spider sense alert him to Mary Jane? Because normally spider sense only alerts you to danger. I do appreciate how they portray Mary Jane in the light that in high school she was the queen of her domain, but in the real world she lacks any kind of skill. It just fleshes out these characters in a manner that makes this world feel more realistic. If anything, it meshes the comic book world with the real world, and it doesn't feel hokey or fake. There are cheesy elements to this film, but there are cheesy elements to life too. I mean, are you 100% stern, boring, and serious every day of your life? No, you bullshit most of the time. Don't Tell Harry is a theme to this film. So Harry is a bad friend. Based on these few moments right here, I don't feel bad that Peter blows half of his face off. The awkwardness of Peter Parker is portrayed well in this film. Even when he was kind of slick with the women, he still made mistakes and said silly things. A lot of them were based on his life of Spider-Man, but still, he's not Tony Stark. He's not 007. He's not suave. It's a cool looking penthouse. Side note, that TV in the background, I owned one of those. Probably weighed about 150 pounds. It was a bitch to carry to college. How would you know that, Harry? You've only been in school for like 6 months with Peter. Dr. Connors, that's another nice name drop, which they continued pretty well in number 2. A little bit of backbone shown by Peter right there. He's not the complete wuss that you people on the internet like to say he is. If I was Peter, I would have taken the job. I'll be honest. I like money. This is a very Spider-Man thing to do. I think one of the strengths of this film is, at many points in the film, in the scripting process, the writer or Sam Raimi or whoever was responsible asked themselves, what would Spider-Man do? Like here, a joke. Those aren't photoshopped at all. Mega crap. In the alternate version of this film, Peter does take his pictures to another newspaper. They treat Spider-Man with respect, and he makes a lot more money. I say that line all the time. I never knew who Elizabeth Banks was until this film, and then I heard when they were going to make Spider-Man 4 that she considered herself too big to play Betty Brant, so take that as you will. I guess ego got the better of her. She's off directing Pitch Perfect 2, 3, 7, I don't know. I've never seen those movies. Exposition dump. This guy reminds me of a dick-headed version of Alex Trebek. As he dickishly drinks his coffee. I'm just trying not to talk over the moments with the better acting, because I don't really have much to add. You're supposed to watch that. Now, here's something I could add. Look at all the product placement and how dated that shit is. God. Macy Gray. This is probably the most dated element of the film. For those who weren't alive back then or just don't remember, Macy Gray was kind of a big deal for like 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes happened to be when this movie was being made. Here would be a great plot twist if those balloons were the Joker balloons from Batman '89 with Smilex gas, and as Spider-Man's fighting the Green Goblin, Batman has to roll into New York and save everyone from being poisoned to death. They should have hired me to write this shit at like 12 years old. $2 billion flick. Calling it right now. They made an action figure of Mary Jane in that outfit, and as a kid I thought it was weird because she wears it for one scene. If anything, they should have just put her in like pajamas or something that she wore for more than 5 minutes. But I don't think many people wanted a Mary Jane action figure. Oh, there we go. That shorthand we talked about earlier, that sound, we know what Peter's experiencing, even though the people around him don't. The only sympathetic character on the Oscorp board of directors, I'm still not sad to see him go in a few moments. Singular. I don't even think Singular exists anymore. And I don't know what TDK makes. Yes, it is. Samsung is still alive and kicking. Suntory whiskey. I've never heard of that, and I drink. So now we start the first big action set piece of this film, right around the middle. There's our Stan Lee cameo. Back when people didn't go to the movies just to see a Stan Lee cameo. Side note, I think Stan Lee's best cameo is from Spider-Man 3. It's very small, it's very simple, but it's very powerful. Here's another Superman moment, but neededly so. Another place where this movie started to show some cracks is the Green Goblin CGI. Gonna be honest, it doesn't look that great. And Harry just got a concussion. When I was a kid, I wanted that role so bad, just to randomly walk into frame and say it's Spider-Man and point to the sky. Would have been my claim to fame, and I would have loved it. This was the most exciting scene in the film when I was a little kid. To be honest with you, when I was younger, I used to fast forward to the scene where Spider-Man first got his regular costume, and I wouldn't watch the first hour of this film. As an adult, I do. I used to think this scene right here actually injured that extra. I don't know why, but I did. Now, this is a great blend of CGI and live action right here. I do like how they actually have the Goblin in frame. The best effects are done in camera. And then they're augmented by the computer. Not the other way around, George Lucas. I think the Mary Jane action figure actually came with this balcony. I know the Spider-Man figure I have 3 of them actually, came with a gargoyle. And the Green Goblin came with this glider. And depending on which version you got, you either had a removable mask or not. I did not have the removable mask version. Was that Tobey Maguire's voice? There's a moment of levity in the action, people. Maybe it wasn't a joke, but it was a moment of levity. A very Green Goblin thing to say and do. I thought this stunt was always cool, and I still do. Right before. And they're off. Now here's your romantic flyby scene like in the original Superman. Still holds up today. Looks incredible. I think the overall timeless aspect of this film is what makes people gravitate towards it today. Because it's the story of Spider-Man. This looks like the place where the hand trains in Iron Fist. Now, this was the first disconnect I had with the film. Spider-Man screaming as he web swung through the city. In every other iteration, he's either having an inner monologue. I never really thought of him as going woohoo through the chasms of New York City. But it's something I've come to accept, and I'm fine with now. Oh, we get to see how weak of a character Harry truly is. I want to buy you something. It just goes to show you that he's a product of his upbringing. Norman bought off his emotions with gifts, and he couldn't spend the time with him, so he just bought him things. I'm sure Harry had the greatest game consoles as a kid. Snowboards. All the cool shit. Like Ryan Phillippe. And she hangs up on him. What a bitch. You know, if you really break it down, Mary Jane's not worth anyone's time. She's a vainglorious piece of shit who doesn't have a heart of gold. She just has to be berated into falling in love with you. Bro, you made a move as he was talking to your dad. It's like a, tag team action. Dad, you run the distraction. I'm going to go in for the kill. That's the best thing Norman ever did as a father. That was a moment that was prominently featured in all the trailers. In the Spider-Man 3 video game, you could actually web swing to Norman Osborn's penthouse. You could go inside, you could break the mirror, and you could find the Goblin Lair. That's a really cool aspect a lot of people don't realize. I don't think a lot of people like that game because it's based off a shit movie. But in reality, not in reality, excuse me, but in my opinion, it's the best Spider-Man game ever. Even over Spider-Man 2, because it did everything Spider-Man 2 did, but better. I wonder if Bruce Wayne's mask room had any inspiration on this setting. Billionaires, comic book movies, stuff like that. The Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde aspect is played up pretty well. As a kid, I never picked up on that. But as an adult going back and reading it, it's always been there. Then again, as a little kid, I didn't have access to a lot of early Spider-Man comics because as a child, I was growing up during the whole spectator boom, where everyone assumed that every comic was worth $1 billion, so they constantly put out books with variant covers of holofoil, gold, firstborn baby blood, all that shit. So as a kid, I only had access to reading whatever was current and whatever, they would reprint. So the Green Goblin stories I read as a kid were like the Harry Osborn Green Goblin, where he dies in Spectacular Spider-Man 200. But as an adult with access to money and time and Marvel Masterworks, I've read a lot of the Green Goblin stuff, and it's this. It's a little melodramatic in the books, but in the movie they were able to do it right. Back to the Daily Bugle. My God, I love this part. I love how he just no plays Peter's objections. I say that a lot. I want a quarter every time someone says it. True story. I was at a meeting in high school. I was trying to get on public access television, and the guy was giving us a crash course in the legal aspects, and he said, does anyone know the difference between slander and libel? And I quoted this movie, and he goes, very good. Where do you know that from? I looked him dead in the eye and said, Spider-Man. So thanks to this movie, I impressed someone. Very important character development for J. Jonah Jameson right there. It goes to show you that while he is a brash asshole, he's noble and he will protect his people. So, he's not just a joke. God, those suspenders are gaudy. Wouldn't your spider sense alert you to that and you could just hold your fucking breath? Yeah, that's noticeable CGI, but it looks so good. I wonder what one more pass with like a modern texture filter would look like nowadays. That's what I would do with movies. I wouldn't remake them. I would just touch them up slightly and remarket them. This feels like Batman 89 right here. And that's not a bad thing. It's very set-bound, it's very dark and gloomy, and very Batman-esque. I'd have to give some more respect to this film, though. They didn't try to blanket this film in darkness like they did with every other superhero movie. The heroes actually did stuff in the daytime. Spider-Man's a bright, fun superhero. He's not a nighttime Avenger. He's technically not an Avenger for most of his tenure. But that's a topic for another video. Even though I'm talking over it, this scene's important because it parallels what comes at the end of this film. Now, I have the question, was this scene written in before the 9/11 events? Because I always say that this film is a reaction to 9/11, and I'll discuss it later as the film goes on. To me, it's the first post-9/11 film that discusses it without essentially saying what happened. It really was like an uplifting moment. And I know it may seem overly dramatic to say it, but like prior to this movie, it was kind of verboten to have a lot of fun. Then this came out and people kind of moved on to a degree and forgot about everything that was going on with the 9/11 attacks. There's an odd production shot of J. Jonah Jameson. Early makeup test, I'm guessing. Now, this was the scene a lot of people talked about, too. Kind of stalkery Peter Parker. Here's one thing I noticed about this film as of right now. Peter Parker dresses a lot nicer in this film than he does in Part 2. It's not a complaint per se, it's really just an observation. See, there we go, talking about the soap opera, which would become Secret Hospital. You know, Mary Jane actually has some interesting things happen to her in the late 80s and early 90s. She has a little character arc where she goes from a model, then she loses it all, and then she kind of just settles into being Peter Parker's wife. It all came at the hands of, what was the guy's name? Essentially, a fashion designer or some rich businessman became obsessed with Mary Jane and ruined her career. Peter, there was your moment. Tell her how you felt, bro. I think every guy's had this moment, though. In many ways, this movie is a coming-of-age tale draped in superhero drama. But there are so many relatable things to so many different people. I think that's the hallmark of a good blockbuster. It's not trying to be artsy and pretentious. It speaks to the everyman in a way that doesn't make them feel stupid. There you go. There is your little bit of marketing advice from world-class bullshitters. So the rain adds some drama. I'll say it again. I love the fucking costume in this movie. It is Spider-Man. So this is pretty dark to imply she's about to get raped. But she does hold her own for a moment. Like, until the weaponry comes out, Mary Jane is capable enough. And along came a Spidey. I've always been a fan of Spider-Man without his mask. There's just something I like about the design of the suit without the mask. It just, I don't know. It's me. It's a personal preference. This scene's very iconic, and I don't like to use the phrase iconic out of context, but this was on everything. It was parodied. It's probably the defining moment of this film for most people. For me, it's the end. As an actor, I would hate to have to deal with all this water in my nose. I think there was a parody of this on the MTV Movie Awards with Jack Black and Sarah Michelle Gellar. God, it just goes to show you how old this movie really is. Who gives a shit about Sarah Michelle Gellar anymore? I think this was post-Buffy. I've never been a fan, so I don't know when the show was on. Outside of 1997. Well, there's the iconic kiss that everyone loved. I'd have to say this part right here is a little hokey, the slow motion in the rain. If they would have cut that out, maybe I wouldn't look at the scene the way I do, but whatever. Now, here we go. Here's a great action scene. I'm a huge fan of this one right here, the fire. Firefighter looks like he has a Hitler stash. I know it's just dirt or ash or soot, whatever it is, but... Now, I love this shot of Spider-Man, how the camera turns with him right here. That is really cool. And it holds up incredibly well 15 years later. It doesn't look dated. Even when you watch this in high def on a big TV, this movie does not look cheesy. Some of the model shots in Batman look bad. In Superman, the compositing looks bad. This still looks great. And if we compare it to 15 years past those other films, those shots still look dated within that 15-year time frame. There's the Evil Dead scream sound effect. There you go. There's another Spider-Man joke. Appropriate, too. His interactions with the Green Goblin get more serious each time they interact with each other, and I like that. It builds. I think a lot of people have problems with attention span issues, and they think everything should be at one big moment, but I like how it builds. Pathetically predictable. This is such a comic book-esque scene, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's overly dramatic, the way it's shot, you got the wide angles. Now, this is the testament to how great the CGI is. I never realized that this was a CGI shot as a kid. I just thought it was slow motion. This is incredible. There are so many money shots in this film. This was the 2002 equivalent of a Star Wars. It kind of came. People knew it was coming out. There was more hype for this, obviously, than Star Wars, but this was a game changer. Star Wars was a game changer for more, but this was a game changer for superhero film. And Spider-Man doesn't really pull his punches, even though he does with the Green Goblin here. He is kicking his ass. Nice transition. He's still sweaty. I wonder if he came directly from the fire to here. Joke. Another joke. I gotta say something. Oh, there you go. Sketchy Norman, making her feel awkward. She has daddy issues, Norman. You could impregnate her like you did Gwen Stacy. This is a very Spider-Man-esque moment. Now this damn drop of blood. Loudest drop of blood in cinematic history. I do like how Peter's computer equipment is basically piecemeal from other things that he was able to scavenge. He does not have the nice equipment. They keep his poor roots at the forefront of his character. And that's important. Because he's not supposed to catch a break until later in life. And even then, it's just he becomes a teacher and things go awry. That's important to his character too, the religious aspect. I don't blame Osborne. Those yams look delicious. I love Thanksgiving. It's definitely the most American of all holidays. I know the 4th of July is our patriotic holiday, but we literally celebrate a day by eating ourselves stupid. Some fun families get to drink, and then we go out and spend a bunch of money the next day. If you're an international listener and you'd like to know what it's like to live in America, that's it. Eat and spend money. This is a nice, subtle moment. I read the novelization of this movie, and I think the razor bats were treated with some chemical to keep the bleeding going or something like that. Because Spider-Man does have a healing factor. It's no Wolverine, but still, I think in the comic book he would have healed up by then unless they were specially treated. I think it's a good scene to show the darker side of Norman Osborn. Again, the human drama, the baggage Mary Jane carries with her, is presented well. To be fair, Harry did attempt to stand up for you. That toy I was talking about in the beginning of the commentary, there's a Norman Osborn figure dressed like this with that chair, and the mask slides into the side of the chair, and I believe it talks. And it was only like $7.99 back then, so there's a lot of quality in those old toys. Good price point, too. It's before companies got greedy. That toy would go for $20 today. Minimum, probably $34, because it talks. And the build quality was superior back then. Sculpt was great, too. This film, I think they used Gentle Giant for some of the sculpts for the actors' faces, because they were spot on. Aunt May reminds me of my grandma in this scene. No one's ever blown the side of her house off, but I know she prays like that. That's a pretty cool scene. Some would call it hokey, but the realization moment. Back to his clothes, though. Where did all his nice clothes go between films? I know that's such an odd nitpick, but he dresses like a hobo in number 2. In this one, he's dressed like a low-end Gap model. It looks like they kept her in the same nightgown from home. The familial aspect is strong in this scene. But that's how it works with Spider-Man. His endeavors as Spider-Man ruin his life as Peter Parker. It's something he's got to learn how to balance. That is why the character should always have a secret identity. This I have friends that know who I am bullshit pisses me off to no end. Because it's Peter's responsibility to protect those around him. So his fun little secret is not just a fun little secret. It puts you at danger. It puts you at risk every moment that you know a secret identity. Because the villains always go for his heart. I mean, it'd be interesting to do a video that parallels this with Superman, because Mary Jane is acting like Lois Lane right now. She's got a crush, even though she's talking to the guy that she's in love with. She doesn't realize it. As a guy, though, I have to say Mary Jane brings a lot more to the table, look-wise, than Lois Lane. Margot Kidder. That is a story for another day. One thing I always question, and that's not just in this film, but in general, Peter makes it known that he interacts with Spider-Man, that he talks to him. No one ever follows him enough. I mean, Frederick Foswell tries and dies, but they don't make it enough of a point that it's like he's the only one that can interact with him. You'd think J. Jonah Jameson would do more to find out. But that's, neither here nor there. But at the same time, now I haven't read every single issue of Spider-Man, but you'd think the police would be more after Peter Parker than they were, like with Captain Stacy. because he's an accomplice essentially to what they consider a vigilante criminal. I think it would be an interesting story if it hasn't been done. If Peter gets arrested and put away for a while, based on the fact that he knows Spider-Man well enough and he's in cahoots, maybe even a court case. See, now I buy that he has had a crush on her all these years when he says these things. But in part 3, when she breaks down and cries down about how he'd been friends all these years, no, you really haven't. You blew him off in high school. Maybe you didn't say anything to him, but you blew him off. You didn't become emotionally invested until you realized what a piece of shit every other guy in your life was. And it was too late, by the end of this film at least. Oh, don't tell Harry. That theme is back. God, James Franco is so young in this movie. I think he was almost cast as Spider-Man, and he would have been an okay Spider-Man based off his looks, but he just didn't have the range. He's a great Harry, though. And Harry plays just as big a part in this trilogy. Oh, Harry, you're gonna get her killed if you don't shut the fuck up. Here's another parallel with Uncle Ben and Peter's relationship. It's actually the inverse. These two come to an understanding at the end of their relationship, but Uncle Ben and Peter come to an impasse at the end of theirs. It's a nice way to bookend the character arcs. It makes me wonder if, had Norman not been killed in this film, if he would have rectified a relationship with Harry. Probably not, but you never know. It adds a level of what if that always makes these films more fun. That's a joke that won't get old. You can take it in two ways as well. Either in this world, Superman is a comic book character, like he is in our world, which makes this film even more believable and relatable. Or you could take it the fanboy aspect and say, well, Superman's out there somewhere. I'm just saying, if you wanted to take it either way, perfectly acceptable for both. What do I think? The former. It's just a nice nod to him being a fictional character. Here's some of that good Tobey Maguire acting. Comes to the realization. I think the subtle moments of this film get glossed over by people bitching about the Green Goblin suit so much, and the fact that he cries at certain appropriate times, that they miss the good stuff. It's kind of been my personal crusade for the last couple of years. In a post-Spider-Man 3 world, people have come to shit on these previous films, and they're not the problem. Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Mans 1 and 2 are problems. The first two are great. Side note, every time I read a Spider-Man comic that features the Green Goblin, my go-to voice in my mind for Norman Osborn is Willem Dafoe. Because before that he was too high-pitched and shrill in all the other adaptations. But Norman, as portrayed by Willem Dafoe, had a set of balls and didn't sound like a little girl. So now this scene is meant to represent a very iconic scene from The Amazing Spider-Man number 121, the night Gwen Stacy died. But they replaced it with Mary Jane because back then it wasn't guaranteed that this was a franchise. I mean, I've demonstrated how much I was into this film. Even I didn't know Spider-Man 2 was coming until maybe January of 2004. Like, I wasn't up on it. Everyone wasn't up on it. Not everything was a franchise. And this is just something that was, a few years ago. This wasn't a lifetime ago. I do enjoy the Goblin's Rampage right here. Now this is a very, very Steve Ditko moment right here. When Ditko was drawing the book for the first 36 or 37 issues, he would often have Spider-Man do this move that's going to come up in just a moment. Nothing epic really happened when Ditko was on the book. It was very small scale, which is fine. I think the stories are very good. I just think the artwork's very basic, and it doesn't hold up. Now, this is a very Ditko move right here, where he slingshots himself. This happens quite a bit under the Ditko run, because the physics of Spider-Man hadn't been created yet. I remember this scene. People were cheering in the theater. It looked great. And again, it's that perfect blend of CGI and live action. He lands a CGI, he's live action. It works perfectly. Nowadays, they wouldn't even build this set. They would just build a blue-screened platform and CGI the rest in. When you build sets, you create an atmosphere. And I think when you create the atmosphere properly, like they do with this film, you become invested in that film. The old school ways do pay off. I think modern technology should just augment it, not replace it. And in many ways, like Batman 89 is the bridge between, is like the last of the classic Hollywood before the CGI era. This is a nice blend between the CGI era and the old school Hollywood, miniatures and stuff like that. This shot right here is cool. I loved it. Now, in the comic book, what happens is Gwen Stacy is thrown off the bridge, Spider-Man shoots a web to save her, and he accidentally snaps her neck. Now, there are retcons that say he didn't kill her, she was already dead. Hell, even in the book that precedes it, 122, he says she was already dead before she fell, but it's kind of, people have gone back and it adds more drama to think that Spider-Man killed his own girlfriend in attempting to save her. It's probably top 5 for the greatest Spider-Man stories of all time. I'm very fortunate enough to own the issue, and it's one of my prized issues in the collection. Ooh, a sucker punch by the Green Goblin. There's a little gaff right there. If you pay close attention to the CGI, her hands actually leave the rope. She should have died. I always thought this was amazing. I mean, this was the first time you ever saw a live-action Spider-Man do anything. There was the 70s Nicholas Hammond series, which was a thing. Most people didn't know it was a thing, and the show, he didn't do many Spider-Man-esque things. He kind of climbed up a wall and barely swung on webs, excuse me. This film created the visual style of Spider-Man that's still being used today. Now, this moment right here, I guarantee is influenced by 9/11. This is the moment that kind of spoke to the political climate of the time. It's all about unity in the face of devastation, and it was a moment where people cheered, like legitimately cheered, because it was a pretty dark time. And I'm not saying this film single-handedly saved the world, but what I am saying is that it gave people a breather from what was happening and what was yet to come. And let's flip the switch, and the film gets dark now. It's funny, for everyone that says how cheesy and hokey these movies are, I don't think they pay attention to this moment. This moment is legitimately dark. Like, he's going to murder Spider-Man. And he attempts to many times. Oh, man. I love the scream. There was an action figure of this battle-damaged Spider-Man. I always wanted it as a kid, but I would just pick other figures instead. But it looked dead on the movie. They did a good job sculpting the Tobey Maguire face. But listen to those yelps and moans. He's able to emote in a way that Batman never does, or Superman can't, because he doesn't feel the pain. Unless Martha's involved. Because when Batman was fighting the thugs in the bell tower, and in many ways this is the bell tower scene, because the villain is going to essentially kill himself. Batman just takes the hits. But this makes Spider-Man so much more believable because this is how any of us would handle this situation. I don't think the average person could survive the pumpkin bomb to the face. And we get to see Spider-Man in a truly pathetic moment right here. He can't defend himself. Here he comes. That looks like an issue of the Spectacular Spider-Man. That would vanquish any normal man. But this is the Green Goblin. Very Evil Dead right there. That is straight out of Evil Dead. And this is another learning moment for Peter Parker because he's about to go over the edge. But it was his upbringing from Uncle Ben that taught him about responsibility and power. I love that they kept that revelation to Peter until the very end. Oh, you sly bastard. For those out there that don't know, this is almost directly ripped from Amazing Spider-Man number 122, where the Green Goblin does in fact kill himself after the death of Gwen Stacy. It's a lot less brutal, but it's essentially the same scene. Done better on film, in my opinion. It's my favorite line of the whole film. You don't get much gravitas in modern superhero movies. There would be a joke here. A little bit of levity and the death. God, he gets stabbed right in the dick, too. And here comes our final theme brought up again. Don't tell Harry. I think this is a nice way to show the actor's face without having them remove the mask every 5 minutes. And this is the power of the Danny Elfman score. It's so unique and different. It does not sound like the Batman theme. Spider-Man had never had an orchestral theme before. And this was the first one, and it's great. They haven't topped it. I like how there's a Walther PPK just waiting. It's a very rich gun. There are some deleted scenes that discuss this further, but I'm not going to talk about them now. A praise can be made to Spider-Man 3 that it does bookend itself with a funeral as well, so it's a nice little moment. But this is a nice bonding moment between Harry and Peter, in a way. It seems like it drives a wedge between them. But in a bizarre way, they both know the loss of a father figure, but Peter feels guilty. Like I said, the beauty of Spider-Man, no one knowing his secret identity adds so much drama. It's an added layer. They had so much drama that everyone knowing he's Spider-Man, it takes it away if everyone knows. If Aunt May knows, if the Avengers know, it always works best when he's the only one who knows. Because he has this great power that he can do all these things, but he can't tell anyone. Again, that line right there, the ones I love are the ones who pay. That is Spider-Man to a T. It's not about the jokes. It's not about the flashiness. It's not about his eyes change shape to look like the old school artist. No, it's not about those things. It's about that moment right there. Read any of the comic books pre-2007. At the core of every Spider-Man story, in some aspect, that is present. That is the theme of the character. Stan Lee and Ditko got it right. Stan Lee and John Romita, Roger Stern, Marv Wolfman, all the guys. I don't think I meant Marv Wolfman, I meant Roy Thomas. But those guys, they got the character. And that kind of element is what made Spider-Man the most prominent superhero from the 60s till even now, even though he doesn't have a major franchise as of yet. Like, Spider-Man's still Marvel's Mickey Mouse. Now, this is rare in any kind of movie where the hero gets what he wants more than anything else and he turns it down. In the book, there's a line that I do like. She goes, "I even thought about telling my father off." And it's like, oh, that was a nice callback, but it's not in the film. It's not necessary. It's maybe one beat too long. Now, somebody I know claims that she knows he's Spider-Man right here, but no. I did not see that coming originally. first rejection from a man that's not her father. Does it draw her closer, or does it drive her away even further? Ah, here we go, the final swing. I'm curious to see if Spider-Man Homecoming has one of these. These were always a nice way to bookend the film. You know, the visual signal that the film's over, and he's finally the Spider-Man that everyone knows and loves. You could argue he was already that by the middle of the film, but talk about an epic way to end an epic film. Nice US flag imagery, not too heavy-handed. So that was Spider-Man, and the credits are starting to roll right now. If I'm going to rate this film on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give it an 8, 8.5. I think this film does everything right. Maybe there are a few cheesy elements here and there, but it's not enough that makes me go, this movie's not that good. If anything, the more I watch this film, the more I love it, because it did everything so right. And the things it did wrong are on a superficial level. I don't think the web shooters are a valid criticism of this film. And if that's what really makes you hate this film, then you really don't care about Spider-Man and the character. It's Hero. This song, I don't normally talk about, you know, the songs in the credits, but this one, I liked it. I hate Nickelback, and this isn't Nickelback for all those out there. I think they actually got in trouble for trying to perform this at their concerts and passing it off as their own song because it's half Nickelback, half Saliva. I don't know who the backup band members are, but this song was really popular for a while. I used to love to catch the video on MTV because I would get clips of the movie. That's really the reason I think I liked the video, because I was so excited for this that anything, like a commercial, anything would draw my attention. And the music video was some of the better parts of the movie condensed down into a music video. I wasn't a big enough fan to go out and buy this album, but I think a few years later at a media play, I picked up the CD single for like $3. So this song's worth $3 to me, and this was the advent before the advent of everyone having an iTunes account. iTunes was a thing. I had dial-up internet when this movie came out. I mean, I'm not going to download a song, just go buy a CD for $3. But back to the film. Like I've said about 10 times through this commentary, the reason this thing stands out and stands up is the fact that it gets the character right. It's not worried about being cool and hip and flashy. It was helmed by a director who liked the film, loved the character, and produced a quality film. You had a great cast. You had people that understood what they were making. They weren't trying to church it up like The Dark Knight, and they weren't trying to tear it down like some of the jokey DC moments in like Suicide Squad and stuff like that. It's also a film that came out at the perfect time. Had you released this a year earlier, pre-9/11, it might have got lost in the shuffle of other early 2000s films that weren't important. But you released it at a time when it was dark and we needed a hero, per se, and this came out and everything just hit. It was seriously one of those movies where you walked in and you walked out a changed person. Oh God, now this song, what is this? Not Sum 41, I was called him Blink 182. This guy was married to Avril Lavigne for like a minute, and he looks like hot shit now, so good for Chad Kroeger. Wait, is that the combining element of the songs from this movie, Avril Lavigne? We just learned something new together, audience. Never really liked hip-hop rap. It's not hip-hop rap, hip-hop rock music. I mean, some of the Beastie Boys stuff in the beginning's awesome. I'm not really here to diss the Beastie Boys, I love them, but Sum 41 was a weird amalgamation of rap and rock. on the level of Limp Bizkit. So the early 2000s were a dark time for music in general. For as much as I, would love to go back and watch some of the TV and wrestling and stuff like that, I'm glad the music has evolved, I guess, for the better. Now, in a moment, you're going to learn the real reason why I stuck through all the credits every time I watch this. Right here. The original Spider-Man theme song. See, this is the cherry on top of the already delicious film. It's just a nice little callback to the theme song, the first theme. And I could say right now that this is the best superhero TV show theme song. I know some will say, oh, Batman the Animated Series. No, Batman the Animated Series is just a nice mix of the Danny Elfman theme, which is great, and it's got a better opening sequence, but this theme song is so powerful that it is stuck with the character through every iteration. The lyrics are spot on. It captures the spirit of the character. It captures everything. Action is his reward. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. All those things, It's the character to a T. It's funny how Spider-Man came out of the gate with the costume the way it looked. They really haven't altered it much. The theme song was great. They came out with the first movie. Everything they did with the character was a home run from the beginning. And it's a testament to show you how strong of a character Ditko and Lee created from the very beginning. It's also very sad to see how it can be bastardized the way it has today by guys like Dan Slott and the slew of shitty artists that have taken over the book. But that is a topic for another video. So we have reached the end of the Spider-Man commentary. It was the first one I did by myself. If you liked this one, let me know. I can do more on my own because it's a lot easier. I can record them at any time of the day since I work from home, and I can do all sorts of different films. I don't have to wait for the guys, and we don't have to take a poll and all that. So if you liked the solo Spider-Man commentary, let me know. We'll consider this just a test. The guys are on Spider-Man's 2 and 3's commentary, and we're very drunk, so you'll enjoy that. But if you wanted something a little more insightful, this was the commentary for you. If you're a fan of our channel, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. Also, to both of you audiences out there, new and old, check out our Patreon. All your money is going to help us grow this channel. It doesn't go into our pockets. We're trying to get new equipment, better computers, a few new things, and we want to produce more content for you guys. Also, if you want to help support the show and you don't want to contribute on Patreon, incarnate-studios.com, pick up a t-shirt. You will help support the show that way as well. And in general, just thanks for watching. If you're a Spider-Man fan like me, I'd like to know how you feel about this film. So down in the comments, tell me what you think. Give me your score on 1 to 10, where you rank this film. And tell me if you're excited for Homecoming or not. And stay tuned for more content this month. We got a ton of shit. I've been working day and night diligently to give you the best of the web spinner. So, thanks for watching, and we'll be back later.